Hello, everybody. My name is Graham Elwood. You're watching The Political Vigilante. I'm here with Danny Haifong from Black Agenda Report. We've been discussing, obviously, what is going on with Russia, the bombing of Ukraine, which I wish was not happening. But we've been talking about all of the reasons America has been intervening or creating this scenario to allow this to happen. And Danny, I want to talk now specifically about, because we were just touching on sort of the financial components of this and what this is really about. It's about America is a collapsing empire. And like all collapsing empires, they try to grab as tight as they can as they're losing control, and they're losing control financially. And they're losing, they're losing their foothold with the world. So one of the things Biden announced today in this crazy speech that's just like, and then starts talking about gas prices. Like, it's just maddening to me that the American media is more concerned with gas prices than the horrific loss of life and the destruction of property and families and all this awful shit that comes with war, right? I mean, there's no discussion of this. It's just like war. And hey, Americans, you're going to have to handle $5, $6 a gallon at the pump to defend your freedom. There's a cost for freedom. Oh, shut! Like I wanted to punch the TV screen when I saw that. So they bring in all these sanctions, which sanctions are an act of warfare, and we sanction all these countries all over the world. I have a documentary called Graham Goes to Russia, which is available exclusively on rockfin.com/Graham Elwood, and I interviewed people. I just went to Russia because I wanted to see what Russians were like. One of the people I interviewed was this guy who was like basically a cab driver, and he had a job at the cargo port as a logistics manager, pretty good job. And he lost that due to the sanctions from Obama, and then had to start driving a cab. In typical Russian fashion, I said, "Are you mad at Obama?" He goes, "Not angry, just fact," which was just like such a great, it's like, wow, I'd be mad, but he wasn't. I give him credit for that. Right. Which that's who these sanctions hurt. We're not hurting Putin. We're hurting some guy that's just got a job. He's got working in a cargo port. Now he's got to drive a cab. Like that's who these sanctions hurt. And what has happened today, I don't know if you follow crypto or not, but I follow crypto and I follow Bitcoin, and the Bitcoin price has not been doing well lately. And leading up this last week, it's been kind of low because there's fears of this war. When the bombing happened, I hesitate to use the term invasion because they've just bombed thus far. The price of Bitcoin went down, and then Putin announced that Russia is going to be basically, I don't know to what degree, but starting to use or convert even to Bitcoin to stave off these economic sanctions. And the Bitcoin prices started to pump back up a little bit. So, what El Salvador did last September, where they announced it in June and it became official in September, I think has changed things. And I think if you read the Bitcoin white paper that came out in 2009 in direct response to the the housing crisis of 2008, America is facing, we just printed whatever $9 trillion in the last 2 years versus all these stimulus plans. We have inflation across the board, some of it manufactured by greedy corporations who've experienced big profits. I know I'm doing sort of a large economic setup. How do you see these sanctions and Russia's response with Bitcoin? How do you see this playing out? Part of me, the optimist in me and a Bitcoin holder, is like, well, maybe Russia will go, haha. And this will, because if people see Russia becomes, adopts Bitcoin as its major currency, Bitcoin investors are going to dump into it and the price is going to go up. I mean, so, which was the part of the design of Bitcoin, was to get rid of the central banks like the Federal Reserve and the IMF, who have a, as we've discussed, mob-like financial control over countries. How do you see this financial and from a financial and a sanctioning standpoint play out?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many levels to it. I mean, you outlined the Bitcoin aspect of this, and I think that's really interesting. I don't follow Bitcoin myself, but I do find the fact that the US dollar is so fragile right now, not necessarily on the cusp of collapse, because the United States does own the biggest financial institutions or have majority stake and leadership over the financial institutions, which really dominate the landscape. But there is this significant shift away from the US dollar that I think points to the future of where the world is going. And sanctions, ironically, they cause an incredible amount of pain. So, of course, these sanctions are going to harm ordinary Russians, working people in Russia, just as sanctions in Venezuela and Cuba and elsewhere have devastated working people and really caused death and poverty to a higher degree. But there's also this, I think, unintended political consequence for the United States, in that the more that the United States sanctions the world, uses sanctions, I think sanctions are on over 30, I think 39, around 39 countries, US or US backed sanctions.
We're sanctioning 39 countries right now.
Yeah, I think it's
Good
nearly,
God.
yeah, it's a large portion. It's a large portion of the world, especially since one of those countries, China, is like a sixth, seventh of the world. So there are some form of sanctions on 39 countries, and all of them, to the vast majority of them are against countries that the US sees as adversaries and wants to starve into submission, whether it's through regime change or this containment policy, which I think the United States, or at least a good portion of its elite, wants to see turn into a regime change policy. Love to see Vladimir Putin in the Communist Party of China out of power, right? But it's just not really in the cards. The point
Mhm.
is, though, is that the more that the United States isolates countries like this, the more that the United States isolates themselves, because unlike China and Russia, the United States is actually on a different trajectory, right? Russia had an incredibly painful experience with the fall of the Soviet Union. The breakup of the Soviet Union was an utter disaster. It caused the life expectancy for men over the course of, I think, 9 years to decrease by more than 10 years, right? I mean, we're talking about a massive shock. It's shock and awe therapy. They call it shock therapy. Massive shock therapy economic policy, which devastated the Russian economy and the Russian people. But since 2001, things have changed a bit. Things have become more stable. There has been more economic growth. And there has been a shift in relations that's partly to do with the fact that the United States has become more hostile to Russia and China. But really, when you look at it, it only makes sense that Russia and China would be closer. Not only do they share a border, but they also share a common history. They share a lot of things economically, culturally. If you just look at, for example, Central Asia, Xinjiang, and Russia, I mean, there are deep cultural bonds there. So it only makes sense that those countries become closer. But the US has accelerated this process because it's now viewing both of these countries as enemies. And so financially, the impact, of course, on these countries of sanctions is significant, right? Even the sanctions on China, despite its intense growth, it causes problems. It creates economic hardship, for example, on people of Xinjiang when Joe Biden sanctions the solar industry, which he did in Xinjiang and still does, or when he sanctions Huawei, and that's one of the biggest tech corporations in China. That creates economic problems despite China's ability to maneuver around them. But these problems then also open up opportunities, which I think are kind of lost on a lot of those who follow these developments where we are in the United States. The opportunities that have arisen are that there is a multipolar world developing, and financially, that is speaking in a big way. Russia has a global economic outlook, a plan, the Eurasian Union, the Eurasian Economic Union, which is it's in process, it's happening, right? Building stronger ties among Central Asian countries, among Eastern European countries, among the entire Eurasian region, China included, to build networks that are in alternatives and infrastructure projects that can avoid the impact of sanctions. And this has a currency element to it, obviously. The same goes for China with the Belt and Road Initiative, right? These initiatives, these aims to create further connectivity economically, politically, culturally, financially, specifically, really drive the United States absolutely bonkers, because you hit it right on the nail when you said that the US is basically a loan shark with a military behind it. That's been the US's role since World War II, when it made the dollar the reserve currency, and it took hold of these major international financial institutions, the Bretton Woods institutions, and wielded them to assert dominance over Europe and the rest of the world, right? It took over Europe's colonies, and at least administratively, it became a neo-colonial power after the European powers were devastated by the war, and they became reliant upon the United States, and their junior partner status remains to this day. Look at the way that the United Kingdom and France, they just grovel at the feet of the United States whenever the United States has an actual objective. Sometimes they'll disagree on small things, but when there's an objective that the United States wants satisfied that speaks to the heart of US interests, those countries follow suit and follow along like lapdogs, because that's exactly what they are. And so this has created a world situation where, yeah, countries like Russia and China are looking at alternatives to the US dollar. They are developing, China is developing a digital currency. When I was there in 2019, 2020, it was actually it was strange, because people would laugh at you if you were like, here, take some of this RMB. They were just like, why don't you pay through the digital, digitally? And then why don't you check out our digital currency through WeChat or these other apps? And I was just like, I don't know how to do any of that, And it was just, but this is the thinking, There's a huge movement for sovereignty in the world that's led by Russia and China, but it's also led by a lot of the smaller countries that see themselves as connected by common positive aims for self-determination and peace and sovereign economic development, and also for defensive aims of, well, we need to make sure the United States isn't destabilizing us. Russia and China at this time are saying we're both opposed to NATO aggression, and we're coordinating on preventing color revolutions from achieving their ends or even getting off the ground. I mean, this shows just such a heightened awareness of the US's role in all of this, and it necessitates financial independence, right? And this is why the United States constantly targets Russian energy. This is what a lot of this is about. It doesn't want 40% of Europe's energy to come from Russia, which is currently what's happening. It doesn't want China's financial institutions and the vast majority of its commanding heights of its economy to be directed by the state. The vast majority of them are state-owned, government-controlled. So China can say, okay, we're going to build 1,000 more kilometers of high-speed rail in X region, because the government can make that decision, and they don't have to listen to, is this going to make money for some rich investor? Is this going to make money for profiteers? And that's what the United States is really afraid of. It's afraid of that these two countries, because of their size, because of their influence, because of their potential, that they will move the world away from US economic dominance and eventually the US dollar specifically.
Yeah, and the curious reaction that we'll all see is like how the US is going to respond to it slowly losing its economic prowess. I mean, its economic dominance, I should say, really, and economic control, as it slowly starts to lose its economic control. Like you say, China created the digital yuan. Now they've tried to crack down on Bitcoin because they really want to force people into their digital. But even, I'm sorry, if you're going digital, I mean, and everyone in China has a VPN. I've been there, you've been there, and they're all probably trading it, converting it to Bitcoin, whatever. Like I'm sure they're all doing that. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. We are still in our 9th month of demonetization from YouTube. So support what we're doing at patreon.com/Graham Elwood or rockfin.com/Graham Elwood, which is a blockchain cryptocurrency platform. It's free to sign up, and there's a premium level at $10 a month. And for that, you get everybody on the platform's premium content. Myself, Lee Camp, Ron Placone, Jimmy Dore, Whitney Webb, Kim Iverson, Abby Martin, and many, many others. You can also support what we're doing at Venmo at Graham-Elwood, and go to grahamelwood.com. We have a PayPal button and a PO box. I also have crypto wallets, which are all in the show notes. Thanks for supporting what we do.